and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 136. Apologies there. I went to set up the streaming and nothing was happening. Fortunately, all seems to be sorted now. Still kind of rushing around, sort of adjusting bits and pieces last moment. Right, okay. Right, where are we? Yes, we're making a start. So today we're going to be doing feedback. I've got 4 different photos. We've got Nadia, Russ and Rosemary have sent me images. So we're going to be giving feedback on that, and there's a whole host of different ideas and thoughts and techniques and tips and everything that's going to come out of that. So keep with me. So welcome. Yes, here we are live on YouTube. Unless you happen to be watching the recording, in which case do make sure you've subscribed and clicked notification buttons and all that kind of thing. If you are watching live, leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what the weather's like, and let's get the chat going. Let's take a quick look. I've got a couple of comments in already. Oh, Meg's here, says good afternoon, everyone. April says hello, everyone in a cold Long Island, New York. Then there's a couple of comments of me apologising for not connecting yet. Maggie says good afternoon, everyone. Stacey says good morning, all. Another cold January day. Supposed to get to mid-50s today and sunny at the moment. Of course, that's 50s Fahrenheit. It wouldn't be quite so cold. 50s centigrade would be considerably hotter. John says hello again from Columbus, Ohio. Russ says good afternoon, everyone. And Rosemary says good morning, one and all, from the drizzly cold Pacific Northwest. Excellent, welcome. Right, okay, please bear with me while I just sort of, after a slightly panicky start there for me, I just need to kind of make sure that I've got everything lined up in the way that I want to have it lined up. So yes, as I mentioned, Janet says hello from Mrs. Auga, Ontario. Anyway, ON, I think. So, hello, Janet from Ontario. Glad you could make it, and apologies if I can't actually pronounce, if I'm not sure how to pronounce the name of the town that you're in. I've not seen that one before. Right, okay, and where are we? Yes, so, here we are. Live, you can tell, can't you? Of course, I don't tend to edit these either, so you're getting this even if you're watching the recording as well. So, yes, following on from last week when I mentioned the idea that what I'm going to be doing for a little while now at least is focusing primarily on critique feedback. This is where you can learn the most from your images. Send me your photos, get the feedback, and it's one of these things that ask almost any photographer what help they would need, what works the best in order for them to help progress, and nearly everyone turns around and says, well, if I can get feedback on my photos from somebody who knows what they're talking about, that will be really, really useful. So that's what this corner of the internet is about. So I've decided to focus much more on doing that in these podcasts. So, it's not it's the ON is Ontario, Canada. That's right, Janet. So Mrs. Alga, I forgot what I said now. Anyway, apparently, so Ontario, Canada. Welcome, Janet. Right. Oh dear. I will calm down and be with you in a moment. Okay. So let's just make a start, shall we? That's probably the easiest thing to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Rosemary. Rosemary from Washington State, USA. And Rosemary has sent in a picture saying, my question is about cropping. So I know I tend to take the wishy-washy middle ground, and I'm not sure if I've done that with this photo. I'm trying to get work on including negative space. So let's pull up the photo. So this is Rosemary's photo. And so she's saying, I'm trying to work on and get to use negative space, but I'm not sure that this image accomplishes that. Again, too moderate. Should I have included more window in the original frame? when I abandon negative space on this one and crop in closer and vertical, so so this is another version of the crop, or to give you a sense of what's going on, Rosemary also sent me, that's the original. So this is the original. This is a vertical crop. This is a sort of a slightly more standard crop. And what we've got here, we've got these couple of Christmas decorations, looks like reflection of Christmas tree in the window. We've got a kind of wooden teddy bear here and a snowman here, and we've got the space. So one of the things I've talked before about is that very often when it comes to cropping, or how we frame the image, is we tend to, things can usually be improved either by stepping back or by stepping forward. And what we tend to very often do is we tend to create this kind of middle ground where we're not really close enough in or we're not far enough back. And so that's what Rosemary's referring to about wondering she's been a bit wishy-washy and not sure what she should have included or not. So where can we go with this? So we've got the story, the theme, the point of this photo then is we've got the two Christmas decorations with the reflection of the Christmas tree in the window. And that's really, so that's what we're trying to get across. The question then is what can be done in the cropping to help enhance that? Now, part of the thought here is actually how much of this, there's a lot of space here, how much is that adding to the story? How much is that adding to the feeling, the mood that we're trying to get across? Is it adding to or is it detracting from? So what we can do is we can zoom in a little bit and we can say, well, does that feel a little bit better? Well, that gives us more sense of what's going on here. We can zoom in a bit more. Now we're getting a real sense of what's going on here. We can zoom right in here, but if we come in this far, we don't really have any sense of the space or around it. So it's a sort of slightly tricky one. So obviously there's a point where somewhere you're trying to include enough of the photo, enough of the key subject, but also enough of the background to enhance the key subject, to add to the narrative, but not so much that it potentially gets swamped out. And it feels a little bit like this, that it does feel a little bit swamped out. So another version of trying was doing this. We've got a lot going on up here as well. Is it really adding to the story? Now, really, the key point in what Rosemary was saying is about, she's trying to work on this notion of the negative space. And if you have enough negative space, it can really draw your attention to the subject. And so in this case, okay, I'll tell you what, let's pull up Photoshop. Let's go to, let's put in the original image here. And so I'll just do a quick colour. Is that? So I need to click on that. Slight colour adjustment, doesn't really matter. Okay, this is more about the space. So whereabouts do you crop? Now, do you include more wall? Let's do a kind of little kind of content-aware crop and add in a little bit more and see what happens. And chances are, I would say probably not. That's not really, we just end up with a whole load of space. That's not really giving us any extra. So there's nothing really to be gained from the wall, so we kind of pull that in. But if we do that, and then just sort of bring that down a bit, we kind of end up roughly where Rosemary got to. I think really, Rosemary, the real problem here is when you talk about negative space, your negative space either needs to be the tree in the window or the wall. And the real problem that you've got is the fact that you've got the corner of the window in this. And so it's this bit here, it's the window frame itself, which is preventing you from getting a kind of full-on negative space effect. I mean, if we were to... Now, the problem is, you see, the window frame goes through this bear here. Tell you what, let's remove the bear. Let's... Okay, yeah, sorry. I kind of know what I'm thinking of here. I just need to kind of... Let's do something like this for a moment. so we don't have the window frame in. Now, because of the picture, sorry, that window frame to the left, because of the picture you've got, so I'll just kind of see if I can take some of that out. We also seem to have a bit of the window frame down here. Now, okay, I'll tell you what, let's just very quickly get rid of the window frame. So I'm just going to do a little bit of this tool, clone tool, to get rid of that. Now, the point that I want to try and get across here is what happens if you have something like this. Now you have the snowman, and now what happens is you get the feeling of the negative space. There's a lot of space around your snowman, and that draws attention to the snowman. Now these are quite bright as well, so what you might do is brighten up the snowman. If I just kind of brighten that, fill that, and then just bring that back in. So let's say we've got something like that, just to give you the idea of it. Now that's creating a negative space, and then you kind of play around with, well, how much more negative space might I like with it? So I need to do the content aware. It's not wanting to do the content aware. That's because I'm on the wrong bit. Okay, so let's copy, paste that up there, and maybe if I want, I can do something like that, and then that will fill in extra levels of stars or reflections and stuff like that. So at that point, you can kind of go as big as you want. Although, again, if you go too big, it comes a point whereby your tiny little figure vanishes or becomes quite small indeed. But the point is that the kind of more space you have around it, the more significant your subject actually becomes. The problem is, if we go back to your very original, the actual original picture, so let's just wind back to your original here, is that there's not enough to create a negative, because you've got the glass here, which is kind of way negative, but then you've got this window frame, and then you've got wall. You've got too many other elements around it for the space to feel truly negative. It's being occupied by other stuff. I hope that's making sense. I realise I'm kind of talking around the subject a bit rather than nailing it completely. I think my head's still kind of stuck with it from the panic of not being able to connect earlier. But I'm hoping, Rosemary, that starts to give you an idea. I think if you're talking about negative space, what you've got to do, maximising that use of negative space, you've got to be able to have an isolated subject in the first place. And if that subject isn't really isolated, then the space around it has got too many other things. So, in essence, your main problem here is the fact that you tuck them into the corner of the window. That's what kind of creates the problem, I think. Alternatively, you have to pull in so you don't get any wall at all, maybe. If you just kind of really bring that right up to the edge of the window, something like that, then maybe you end up with more of a sense. But they really do feel a bit tucked in the corner. And again, you don't get that sense because we've then got this big block here as well. So, I mean, again, let's just take that out, put something in like that. But the problem is there's too much light. We're now missing this. We're not really getting our attention too drawn to these characters because the window frame is getting in the way. So it's really about the negative. If you're trying to work with negative space, you need to kind of have an isolated subject in the first place to make sure that there's space around them. And the problem is that the window frame and the lights and what have you become too kind of part of it. So you're not able to create that isolation sense that you wanted. So, sorry, apologies there. I feel like I've been really talking around the subject, but I hope I'm getting something across there, Rosemary. I hope it kind of makes sense to you. Okay. A few comments here. April says, I like the bouquet. Russ says, for me, it's a bit too busy for negative space. Well, there you go. He summed up exactly what I've been trying to say. Thank you, Russ. You've said in a sentence what I was trying to say over 10 minutes. Pat says looks good to me. Rosemary says well taken, Russ. Having said that, Russ says I do. That said, I do like the image and the bokeh reflections. Stacey says I like decorations, maybe crop further in. Aviji's joined us and says good evening, friends. Back to Chennai and sunny days in India. Nice edit and looks good. Rosemary says, that's such a great point about the window frame. So the key would be to envision the shoot before taking it so I can position my camera better. Absolutely. If you're thinking I want to have a photo with where negative space is going to be the key aspect of it, then you need to make sure you position your subjects in a way that it's going to make it easier for you. Oh, Robert's here, says howdy all from Texas. Sorry we're late. Oh, that'd be Robert Andan. He said we. And Meg says really lovely photo. Vigi says the bright light still attracts the eye. Stacey says good point. Kim well said good learning point. And Rosemary says does help. Thank you. Phew. Yes, isolate the subject. The feedback on the brightness of the bokeh is helpful as well. Cool. Right. Okay. Well, thank you for sending that one in. So, well, let's move on then. Let's move on. And next up, we're going to look at Nadia. And Nadia sent me a before and after picture I took from a couple of branches to I took out a couple of branches to give the robin more room to view. So let's flip over here. This is the unedited, and then this is the edited version. So Nadia says, yeah, so she's taken out a couple of, as well as creating a kind of more of a colour and depth and playing around with the contrast. You can see there's a branch here runs down right in front of the robin's nose, and she's removed that and one or two others, which I think actually does make a difference. She says, I would like to hear your thoughts on the processed image. So, as well as removing the branches, she's richened up the colours, given it more contrast, more depth, and as a direct comparison, instantly we can see that it's well improved on the original thing. Now, the thing that really struck me about this, has to be said, is when I look at this robin isn't particularly very focused. In fact, none of it's particularly sharply focused. It looks like you had whatever shutter speed you had was just fractionally too low for your. I think you've used a zoom lens. I've got a funny feeling. I looked at the bits and pieces, and you just sort of stretched out a kind of 195 or 200 mil lens, pushing it to the limit, and maybe your shutter speed isn't quite fast enough to cope with the wobble and vibration of the. So everything's slightly out of focus, and yet when we look at this, that is really sharp. And I was quite surprised by that, because there's no amount of work I could do in Photoshop that would sharpen anything to that degree. So I asked Nadia, I said, well, have you used one of these AI, artificial intelligence, sharpening programs that have now they're getting wider and wider use? And she said, yes, I've used On One No Noise, the AI sharpening. And it is really quite incredible that that it's even possible to create, to move from this to this. Now, what kind of happens here? The way a lot of these artificial intelligence, so how does it know which bits to deepen, which bits to make more, to sharpen, and what have you? And essentially, the way these AI algorithms work, or a lot of them work, is they are tapping into a library of thousands or probably millions and millions of images. And sometimes what they do is they can essentially kind of lift from other images. So there's a notion of whether they're actually taking directly or they're just learning from. In that library of images will be thousands of photos of birds, of robins, for example. And so there's and feathers and particular kinds of textures. And just like you get face recognition on your phone, there's all sorts of recognition software now. It's like there's a photo site called Guru Shots, which has lots of competitions. And when you upload your picture, it tags your photo for you. It offers up tag suggestions. And some of the tag suggestions are sometimes wildly off. It's obviously not worked out exactly what it is you put up, but some of them can be really accurate, and you think, wow, it's actually recognised it's this particular flower. It's not just a flower, it's this particular version of a flower, or it's not just an animal, it's this particular version of an animal, and it's put those tags in. And so the recognition software is growing at exponential rates. And so what happens with these artificial intelligence sharpening software is their reference library has become huge, and sometimes I think they literally reconstruct bits of images from using other images, and sometimes it's a case of just working on a familiarity, but really where's it creating the pixels? There isn't, when we look at this one, we zoom in, there aren't the number of pixels there to know precisely where those feathers are falling. So this is now a kind of a growing area. So you can take your photo, and you didn't quite get there, but now for a long time we've been able to rescue certain amounts with Photoshop. We can draw a bit more detail out of the highlights, a bit more detail out of the shadows if we're using RAW. We can remove twigs. We can rotate and crop. So we take a photo, but it doesn't end at the point we go click. Editing is a key part of what we do. But it seems now that there's the software is getting better and better and better at being able to correct our mistakes. Ideally, though, of course, we still want to be able to get the best kind of photo we can in camera, because the better the photo you get in camera, the more you can do with it afterwards, or the less you need to do with it afterwards. But in terms of the way software can rescue a photo, I found it quite incredible. So that's sort of slightly an aside. But to come back to this, Nadia's wanting to know about my thoughts about what's being processed. So the sharpen, that's something that's really come into mind. Now, if I just quickly open this with Photoshop, I do tend to feel that for me it feels sort of slightly dark, oversaturated, or maybe it's because I've been seeing the other one. I'd be tempted, I think, let me just duplicate that. I'm just going to go to, again, it's an auto thing, where I go auto tone and then maybe auto color. And what that does, that's made it maybe a fraction too green. It's sort of shifted it to the green away from the orange yellow, but then maybe somewhere in between I might sort of nudge that along there. And actually that feels like a slightly better way of doing it. The other thing that feels to me that while that you do get a lovely sense of depth there with the, it's a wide aperture you've got, so you get a sense of the forest, the wood, the trees falling away. The robin itself actually feels slightly flat compared to the background, and I don't know whether that's partly to do with the sharpening software or the way it's been edited afterwards, but I would maybe want just a little bit more contrast in the robin itself. And so for that, you might, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let's just copy paste that. Let's just briefly, quickly sort of select the robin. And then what I will do is, if we go to a kind of curves, and I just sort of, I will clip. So I'll just, take this little square down here in Photoshop allows me to mean that if I make any adjustments, it only affects the layer below it. So if I just kind of do that a little bit, maybe push that up a little bit. So we created a little slightly more contrasted robin. Might have slightly overdone that. Maybe even lighten the whole. Take that one off. Take that one off. Lighten it a bit, and then pull that down to create just a touch more contrast. Something like that. So your robin just then, I think, stands out a little bit more. Again, if you feel that's just a little bit too much, you can always change the opacity of it until you kind of find the balance that works best for you. But overall there, Nadia, I think you did the right thing to remove those branches that were in the way of it. You're wanting to make sure you're sharpening. That's really impressive. But but you also want to make sure that you've boosted the if we look at this, there isn't anything like the amount of darks in the background. So you've boosted that sense of dark to give you that sense of depth there. If you're going to do that, you need to make sure that the robin has a similar level of dark and shadows and contrast to the background. Otherwise, it tends to feel a little bit like it's being sort of cut out and stuck on. But that's really so that's, if you're wanting to know about processing, that's really what I would advise at that. So hope you found that one useful, Nadia, and thank you for sending it in. Right, just close that. Comments. April says, "Oh, I love the cutie. I would crop it down a little." Rosemary says, "I like what you've made. That you've made the little robin stand out in the edit." Russ says, "Huge improvement in the editing. You've given it such a lovely warmth, and moving the branch was an excellent idea." Stacey says, "I like the bird shot. Birds for me are very difficult, but I enjoy the edit." April says, "Wow, never heard of that software. Amazing." Rosemary says, "That is such an impressive AI sharpening. This shakes my notion of what is sharply focused in camera. My world has been flipped. Could you please repeat the name of the software?" Well, there's a number of different softwares out there. ON number one, no noise AI sharpening is what Nadia said to me. But basically, if you just type into Google AI sharpening software, a whole load will come up. There are several on the market now. Go and read the reviews, see what ones are about. If you want to go there, you might find that there's the odd photo that you can rescue, which, I mean, again, I still think there's a level whereby, as photographers, we're out on the hunt to try and get the photo we want. And, always what we're trying to do is get the photo that we set out, and sometimes that photo, we just don't get that photo. On that day, the light wasn't right, the camera settings weren't right for the light, the wildlife or the landscape or the whatever didn't operate in the way we wanted to, and we have to come home empty-handed. A bit like if you go fishing, you don't always catch something. You might come home empty-handed. But that doesn't mean you stop fishing. It just actually, in some ways, gives you even more of a drive to go out and hunt down what you want at a later date. But sometimes there's a photo you really wanted and you can't go back. Maybe you're on holiday, you're in a certain place, and you just but you want to have a good version of the photo, and it can get rescued by the software a little bit. So I think it's one of those things. You can't go back, you can't put the genie back in the lamp as such. So there's a way, but I think it's a case of understanding to use the editing software to enhance the photo that you're trying to get, but always be careful about relying on it to replace learning the skills, such that ideally you wouldn't need the software, if you know what I mean. Use your camera so that you can get the best, so you can get a photo that's in focus with the right light and all the rest of it. And then you only use the software if you weren't maybe able to get it. You get home, so yeah, I think there will be ongoing debates with this, I think. It's interesting, really interesting. Meg says, "I think of Christmas when I see a robin on a great photo." VG says, "Missed the name." So ON1, I think. And the robin, I've never seen a real time in my life, but I'm absolutely in love with this little bird. And Stacey says, "I know a few people who use ON1. It is cheaper than Photoshop and has similar editing." Well, certainly it's got this AI. I've got no idea what other editing facilities it has. So, thank you. Let's move on then to Robert. Now, I need to congratulate Robert, first of all. The images he sent me, first of all, but he did say, "I don't know whether you saw Anne's post on Facebook about the Dallas Camera Club. I had 2 third place and 1 second place finishes for the December contest. Well done, Robert. 2 of the images you helped me with, so I really owe you a debt for my photography skills. I don't think I would be anywhere near the level I am without your insight and guidance. Again, thank you." So, smug points for me. But I'm really pleased for you with that, Robert. I'm delighted that what I'm doing is helping you. Now, what I would just, as a little kind of, nice little moment of smug there for me. But what I'd like to point out, again, in this notion of the critique, Robert it's been wonderful watching Robert over the last couple of years. Your photography is constantly improving. And one of the things I will point out is that Robert does regularly post for critique. And it's one of those things that you can watch these podcasts, and that's great, and you will learn things from these podcasts, that's great. But it really makes a difference if you get feedback on your own photos. So make the most of this. You know, there aren't many places on the internet. Sorry, too many thoughts at one place. But there aren't many places on the internet where you can get genuine feedback. So do send me your images. At the moment, I mean, I've got 4 for today. I could possibly do 5, maybe 6 if I wasn't going off on too many tangents in a week. If nobody sends me anything, we have no podcasts. If too many people send me things, then I will select them. But right now, there is a real opportunity for you to get feedback on your photos, so take advantage of it. Right. And so, yes, let's move on to Robert's picture itself. So he says he's having trouble with this picture. So it goes on to say, I'm having a problem with this picture. I took the long exposure in Paris last February, and this was the clearest photo of the subject. So he's tried that. I've done several of these, and this is the best one. That the rest had camera movement. I really like the shot, however. The 4 upper street lamps are blown out. So when you look at these, particularly at these ones up here, these big ones, lovely starburst effect on them, but the highlights were completely blown. There's also quite a strong kind of blown element on the light coming from the cars here, from the cars on the left. I tried to make them look better, but it tends to make the edits look unnatural or distracting. I have this problem with quite a few other photos I've been editing lately and don't know what to do. Can you help, please? Right. Okay, Robert. So I can kind of see where your problem lies. Now, first of all, you're at this point whereby essentially you've just overexposed that little bit too much. And what you would have been better off doing is underexposing a little bit more, and then sort of in the edits, what would have happened then, the highlights wouldn't have been blown as much, and then you could just allow the shadows to be as they are, because there's plenty of other light around, and then you can kind of adjust the shadows a little bit as and when you want them. Especially the camera there's a lot of detail still to be pulled out of the shadows when you get into RAW. So in a dark situation like this, don't expose for the shadows, expose for the highlights when you've got the bright street lights, to try not to overdo the lights so you don't end up with the blown highlights. So what Robert also did was he sent me the original. So here you can see that the whole picture is lighter. He's darkened it afterwards. And this is what I'm saying, is if you sort of shot it slightly darker in the first place, you'd have been slightly better off. But what we can see here is with the highlights are really quite there. So if I just straightforwardly open this photo, let's just close Rosemary's and Nadia's here for a moment. And what we can see is we've got these kind of slightly blown highlights. But the thing is that for all the fact we can now know after the event that it should have been slightly underexposed rather than overexposed, he can't go back to Paris. What can he do? So he's trying to... So when we come to here, you can see he's darkened, he's played around with contrasts and bits and pieces. But the darks, the highlights are kind of just looking grey. That's the real thing. When we come into here, he's darkened down the highlights, but there's a kind of grey. They just don't really look very natural. So what do you do if you want to darken them down? I mean, we can go to the levels here, we can drag that down, but then if we go too dark, we end up missing bits of detail and stuff like that. So I can take this, I can put it into Camera Raw, and certainly if I hit auto, what does that do? That kind of brings out more detail and it's sort of darkened some things down. The overall thing though, I think is maybe slightly overexposed. We pull this down, I start pulling the highlights down a bit too more, and we're kind of moving into this grey realm again, which I'm not overly keen on. So let's go back here, take off the auto, we'll bring the highlights down a little bit, bring the shadows up a bit, maybe create a little bit of clarity, something like that, a little bit of texture, and just open it like that. Now we've still got bright highlights. Now the next bit here is, we see quite often what you might do is you might go to the burn tool and then you select your highlights, and then when you start burning it, because you're trying to take it down like that, the problem is the burn tool makes it grey. It essentially uses the black-white scale to make something darker or lighter. So if I again burn this down like that, you can see it goes grey, and it's just not very nice. So the trick here then, Robert, is to actually, if you're going to darken it, is to darken it using the same colour range. So if we go to this, what we've got here is we've got this lovely kind of yellow gold starburst. So if I use the colour picker tool, and let's pick kind of a little bit of that yellowy orange, just kind of something like that. Now, if I paint it straight, let's turn that to a paintbrush for a moment. I'll tell you what, let's put this on a separate layer first of all, so that I'm not destroying the original. If I paint that straight, that just looks a bit too odd. But okay, I've also got that at 50%. So if I put that at 100, you can see that it's. However, there's a couple of other things I can do here. I can change the way this layer interacts with the layer below. This sits at normal. If I go to darken, what darken does, it means anything darker than this yellow just gets painted the same colour. If I do multiply, it takes it and it starts to grade as well with the others. So it doesn't end up blocking everything completely. You can still kind of see through it. Now, that's a bit too strong because it's gone strongly orange. So what we do is we just take that down a bit. Now, so if I just nudge this until we're just off the white, but it's not really obvious, then I can go around and I can do the same on that one, come over here, do the same on that, and the same on that. And so now what we've managed to do is we've managed to kind of darken down these bits here a little bit, without them going that grey colour that you wanted. If we wanted, we could do the similar kind of thing. We've got the traffic lights here with this sort of blue-green. If I wanted to do the same thing, I would pick the colour there, and then again come down here and just, now that's too strong, so I'll just take that down to 50%, something like that, and just do a very slight colour shift on that. So the off-white is the off-white in the same colour range. Okay, and then if you really wanted to get subtle, you could do the same thing with these. I've got this sort of slight brown colour there, and you could even kind of just do a very slight, you know, if you feel that those ones are burnt a bit higher, a bit overdone as well, and that just takes the edge off. This here is slightly trickier because it is white and there isn't so much of a reference point. So my reference point, again, if we go down to where the starburst is, there's actually a sort of slight blue indigo tint here. So I would be tempted to sort of take that, and then if we just very lightly just take that down, something like that, then it just takes the edge off the brightness of it, but it keeps it within a more natural colour scheme rather than it turning black. So although it's at a very subtle level and you're not really going to notice it until you start printing it up, if you look at, say, this bunch of here, and we've got the sort of before and after, we're just taking the edge off it being bright white, but not having that horrible grey colour. So that's kind of your solution. Use your colour picker to pick a colour around where the light is. So whether it's the green of the traffic lights, or the orangey yellow of the street lights, or even that kind of sort of pinky beige of the street lamps, or that sort of slight bluish indigo tint in the car headlights. So I hope that helps there, Robert. Gives you a few ideas. So Couple of comments. Rosemary says, what a great scene. I love the lines that lead us into the billboard. Nice light trail, starburst perspective is great. I hope you weren't in any danger lying in the middle of the road. Yeah, I'm assuming you were probably in one of these sort of midpoints in the crossing, which is perfectly safe, and then sort of just sort of got down at road level there. Fiji says, beautifully shot. Fiji also says, night lights and shutter speed limits may lead to noisy photographs. This one is crisp. Rosemary says, thank you for defining the way masks interact. I find that helpful, and that's useful. And the off-white in the same colour range done subtly really helps with the blown out highlights. I must remember that. Stacey says, good point. Russ says, love the photo, Robert, and somewhat very useful tips, Kim. I've struggled many times with the burn tool, turning things grey many times. And Robert says, brilliant, exactly what I was looking for. Excellent, good, job well done. So a quick reminder for anybody, if you're finding these podcasts useful, entertaining, interesting, and you would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. So on to the last picture then, and we're going to be looking at one of the, or rather three, that Russ sent in. So quick reminder then that I will have up to, I will maybe, 4, potentially 5 slots maybe next week, depending on how much I tend to go off on tangents. Get your photos in. This is your chance. Not just photos, questions as well, actually. Really good. If there's a particular aspect of photography that you never quite got your head around, or it doesn't matter how many times you read it or how many times somebody's explained it to you, it's not quite stuck. Or you just come across something new, or that's new to you and you're less certain about it, or there's a particular set of circumstances you're wanting to try and photograph something but you can never quite get the camera settings right. Ask the questions as well. I can answer questions as well as work as examples on photos. So send me in your questions and your photos for next week. Okay, so where are we? So on to Russ. So Russ says, hi Kim, I think the very first podcast of yours I watched was one all about still life photography and the importance of good composition. Yeah, still life, always still life. Okay, now I'll come back. With that in mind, I've been a bit cheeky and submitted 3 of my attempts at producing something approaching an acceptable still life image. Now, we'll Russ run through these. I'm not going to do critique on all 3 of these, but the point of what Russ is wanting to do here is talking about the way he sees progression and wanting to know if we can see any sense of progression. So his first of the image, so the first still life that he'd done prior to watching any of my podcasts, was the paintbrushes and the palette. Then there was crackers and cheese, which is this one. And then his latest one later was the rolling pin and eggs, this one being the most recent. This was the only one of the 3 I have done since seeing the podcast and the one I'm most pleased with. I'd be very interested to know if you can see any progression or improvement through the 3 photos and where they could be improved. So thanks for sending these in, Russ. Now, still life is one of these brilliant places to really practice your notion of story, light, composition, right? The great thing about still life is you don't have to worry about, like in landscapes, whether the weather is right, whether the sun is in the right position. You don't have to worry, like in wildlife, where the creature didn't turn up or didn't face in the direction that you wanted to. You don't have to worry, as in portrait, where the person you're photographing is getting bored and fed up while you're playing around with things. You have absolute control over every single element. And because you have absolute control over every single element, this really gives you the time and the space to practice and hone and refine your photography skills, particularly your lighting and your composition. Now, there are key things to what makes an effective still life. And they are the content. So you can take any random set of things and shove them onto a tabletop, so you could have a Lego piece next to an egg, next to a glass of whiskey. The problem is what is the point of them? What combines them? As a narrative, when we look at a photo, the moment we see a photo, we start making connections between the pieces. And if the pieces don't have any kind of obvious connection, it's kind of dissatisfying. So generally speaking, you have a theme. Now, what Russ has done with these, so this theme, obviously, we've got rolling pin, we've got eggs, we've got cookie cutters, we've got flour, and we've got bits of flour onto the wooden tabletop as well. In the previous one, we've got a cheese and crackers, grapes, cheese knife, crackers coming out of the thing. And the first one, we've got the artist palette with the brushes and the paints. So with each of these, you've got your theme, and that's great. Then there's the notion of the lighting. Okay, so in this case, so your lighting, whether you're going for bright lights or whether you're going for, so in this case, moody shadow lighting. This one, a kind of slightly brighter light, but a very solid black background. This one has a kind of soft, trying to go for that kind of almost window light kind of effect, maybe slightly too harsh for that. Maybe a softer softbox to get a slightly more natural window light feel, I would say, with that. But that's the lighting. But you've got the idea of the story, you've got the idea of the lighting. Then we move on to the notion of composition. Now, there are basic compositional techniques, like making sure your horizons are straight, making sure you've got a, if you're doing a vertical, that that it is vertical, that notion of rule of thirds. And then there's things like use of diagonals, which we've talked about, adding a certain level of energy. And with most of the pictures you've got something there. But then there's the kind of the extra levels of composition, the ones that don't tend to be taught quite so often. We all know about rule of thirds, but other ones that I've talked about are things like leading lines, things like containment, things like echoes, and very importantly, kind of the notion of flow, which all of these things are leading to, which is what happens when your eye goes into the photo. Does it have to jump from place to place, or does it move smoothly through and around the photo? Is your eye given enough clues to be able to follow the lines and move through the photo? And if we go back to this one, what we have is, part of the problem here is, whilst I think the lighting is good, the content is good, but in essence where this falls down is where the eye is going, because our eye gets drawn to, in this case, because you've got a wide aperture, our eye gets drawn to the sharp part. So the sharp one is this here. But then this is pointing in this direction, which leads us over here to tips of brushes. The brushes, though, are pointing us out in this direction. There's a hole, which is a strong place of contrast, which is drawing our eye here, but then that bit's not quite in focus. So we have lines leading us out of the picture. We have this pointing us in this direction, and we've got this, so we've got different points grabbing our attention, and none of them quite line up. So although on a basic level, nice photo, paints, you've got the stuff there, the levels of extra refinement where you want to go, and basically what's happening here, Russ, is I'm holding you to a higher standard. You've nailed the basics, you know what you're doing with that, so we're trying to move you up the levels from where your starting point is. And with this, what's happening is there's a conflict of where the eye is going to get drawn to. So that's where it falls back with this one. When we come to this one, I think it feels a bit too flat on, and I think you know this already. I like the curve of the biscuits. This is a good use of containment, where what you're doing is, the idea of containment is so that as the eye moves towards the edge of the photo, it sort of bounces and gets pulled back in, rather than the eye getting thrown out of the photo. However, this here kind of sticks up straight. There's a lot of black here, which isn't necessarily giving us something. It's just the whole thing feels very vertical and kind of flat. There doesn't feel like there's a lot of real dynamic energy going on with this one. So let's move into this one. This one now, I think, is an improvement on the others. The rolling pin at a diagonal gives us that sense of energy. Although you're starting to go out of focus by the time you get to the tin at the back, you've used a much narrower depth of field, so most of it's in focus, so your eye can sort of make out what all the different elements are. There are some things like we've got the circles of we've got eggs here and we've got eggs over here, so there's kind of little echoes going on. Overall, I think it works better. ways of improving, things to understand here about the still life, I think, which might still be working slightly against you, Russ. So I'll tell you what, let's just open this into Photoshop so we can see the whole picture, and then maybe what I can do is draw a couple of lines over the top of it. So we'll just close Robert's pictures there. I'll change that to a pencil tool, narrow that down. We'll just increase the size of this, and I'll tell you what, let's create a separate layer here. So, like I said, with the lighting, I think the use of a single light is fine, that's good. But what you're essentially is starting to emulate the idea of a natural window light, except for the fact that the shadow here at the back feels quite hard. I think this is maybe a slightly harder, maybe a slightly harder light than you would want, a softer, a larger softbox or something like that, perhaps. It also feels a little bit kind of tight in places. Now, I think what's happening here, there's a couple of different things where I feel it's sort of working slightly against you. And one of the big things, this tin of flour doesn't sit within the flow of the photo. If you think about the way you've darkened things and the way you've got the flour kind of going here, that essentially what you've done is you've created a space like that. And if we were to ignore that lot up there, this is really where everything's happening. And you've created that happening by the outline of your flower and where all your bits are. Then what happens is suddenly we have this bit sticking up. And so it doesn't really sit within the flow of the photo. We've also, I would say, you've got a slight problem with the fact that because the rolling pin is such a strong object and with such a strong diagonal, and added to that, you know, the handles themselves then point out, it becomes like having two fingers, one that's pointing that way, one that's pointing that way. And what that has the potential of doing is throwing the eye out of the photo. Let me show you another photo. Okay, so I'll tell you what, let me open this photo here, which you may remember. This is the one that I was talking about with the still life. And how what we're doing here is we're trying to contain lots of these different kinds of elements. So when I originally did this, to run you through, because I don't want to spend too much time on this photo, but I want to use the examples of it. So that notion of containment is that this knife curves slightly inwards. This jug is pointing that way. This jug is pointing that way. Apart from the little tip of the pear, which is one of those things that now irritates me ever since, the pear curves us that way. The apple curves us this way, the apple peel curves us this way, the pear curves us this way, the orange peel curves us this way. So wherever we're at, our eye gets drawn back into the photo. So as our eye starts to come out this way, the curve in pulls us back in. As our eye starts to wander out this way, the curves pull us back in. So each of the elements is pulling us back into the photo. As well as that, there's a flow within the photo. So these grapes tumble down here, and then as they you just drop off that, you curve back up with the orange peel. The orange peel then brings you back up to the pomegranate. The pomegranate, we've got the apple. We've also got a bit of the coffee pot here with the spout pointing us back in. So we can kind of come back around here. Likewise, this lemon peel brings us round to the apple and the grapes, and maybe brings us back around the orange, and then we've got the orange peel. So there's these kind of bits where we can, everywhere our eye goes, there's something to kind of pull our flow back into the picture. The exception to that, and the bits where we run into sort of slight possibilities, is we've got this point, this bit here curves up. Just like that, and that points the eye upwards. And ever since I look at that, I feel I really should have just chipped that bit off. I think if I just actually came in and then let's just I just took that bit out, something like that. Suddenly, actually, I think that works a lot better. So in terms of flow, we've got another bit with the candle as well. Slightly less worried about that because the smoke goes up, and because it's gone out, it maybe just draws our eye back. But the thing is that 99% of this has a flow to it. Now, having talked through that, Russ, let's come back to here. The flow is interrupted. We start curving around the bottom here, and then there's a sudden jerking up, down, and then there's a sudden drop off, and then we curve back round. And then likewise, now this is slightly, you've managed to mitigate by the fact that this gets darker and the fact that there is a curve with the flower. So the pointing out this direction gets mitigated there. That's okay, but it doesn't at this end. At this end, this kind of carries on pointing us out in this direction. So that's ruining the flow and it's taking us out of that notion of containment. So if we then go back to what you might do with the composition of this, I think, as an example, if you had another object in here, now it might be a smaller tin, or it might be you've even taken some of these cookie cutters and sort of stood them up here, or like I say, you might have another tin here or something like that. But if you've got something just sort of, let's say, sitting into this space here, and maybe even if it's sort of slightly angled like that, then what happens, let's just swap the colour, then you find that this line kind of comes up here. Now, what you would also need then is something over here, and ideally you would want something that would curve and catch that. Now, it might mean another tin, it might mean a sieve on its side. Not entirely sure. You would have to play around with the implements you've got to hand. Something related, obviously, to the eggs and the flour, and maybe you've got a nice butter sculpture. But if you had something in here, then again, your flow would come back down here. It would catch round the corner of that, and then maybe you sort of emphasize your flower a little bit more around here. And now we've got this containment, and I think at that point your whole sense of the still life is going to work much better. You're looking for the objects that are going to, so you've got containment, you've got flow, and you've got leading lines, and some of your leading lines are leading the eye in towards something, and some of the lines are leading away from, so that the eye doesn't go shooting out the side of the photo. So to go back then, that's the wonder of still life. The still life is your chance to really keep playing at it. Take photo after photo, try different things, try different themes. You do have a really good eye for this stuff, Russ, and you know light and you understand composition. I think this is about refining it and taking some of these compositional ideas up to the next level. And I think once you start understanding that notion of containment and that notion of leading lines and a thought flow within the picture, it's going to really lift what you can create up to the next level. So I hope you found that useful. I hope that was gives you a few thoughts and ideas there. So okay, love. Yeah. So no, love. Just seen somebody. Stacey says, "Love still life." Okay, she also had a problem with the Wi-Fi disappearing, but it's back now. VG says, Kim once during a still life challenge mentioned about the different directions objects should point. If different elements point in different directions, then it can be a bit confusing where to look. Yeah, that's about that notion of flow, where it's going. Stacey loves the artist palette photograph. VG says, lighting subjects are beautiful. April says, all right, so it looks like April's been having a little bit of problem with a lag on the streaming on this. Anyway, hopefully it's all fine now. Russ says the original background to the cheese and crackers was white tiles, but they looked grey and grubby, so blacking it out seemed like a good idea. I can understand that, yes. Maggie says, would some paint dollops help to enrich the composition and points of interest? It's very clean. Well, yeah, paint dollops, I'm sure, is the first thought that comes to you, Maggie. But yeah, there's that maybe a texture, that notion of a slightly textured, but soft textured background, even if rather than a sort of solid black, I think, with the cheese crackers might have worked a bit better. What else have we got? Pat says, love the earthy background. Rose says, I like seeing your progression over time. Russ, the baking still life is my favourite, plus I'm a sucker for earthy backgrounds such as this. Kim, your tips are very useful, thank you. April says, still life is no easy task. Russ says, thanks, Kim. That's really helpful. I may have another bash at that image now. Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing what you create. Do make sure you show us. April says, we'd love to see your next one, Russ. And Russ says, I did think that, Maggie. So could be paint splatters to come. So there we go. Thank you ever so much to Russ, to Robert, to Rosemary, and to Nadia for sending in the images. I hope you've all found this really useful. Oh, Nadia says, oh, just arrived late. We'll catch the rest later. Okay. And Meg says, I'm craving for cheese right now. Yes, that's one of the problems of doing food still lifes. Makes everybody rather hungry. So, reminder, if you find these podcasts useful, entertaining, helpful, whatever, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support them. But as I say, these podcasts are about you, your photography, helping you to advance. If you found some of the, if you found some of these tips and tricks useful, and some of these tips and tricks you're going, actually, I never thought that before I saw this photo, then it means there could be things with your own photos. And this is the point. With our own photography, we have blind spots. We are very, very close to our images, and it's very, very difficult to really be able to step back. Sometimes we're missing something obvious. Sometimes we're trying to do a bit of an edit and we just can't get the effect we want, and we don't really know why. Put your images, send me your images, and I will do my best to help. That's what these podcasts are here for. That's what I'm here to do. Come April, we'll have been doing this for 3 years. It's a major opportunity for you to learn and advance your own photography. So do send your in. What I would also say is please try and get your images in, ideally no later than Friday. If they turn up on Saturday, I don't tend to have as much time to really be able to drill down and get necessarily the best answers for you, because I like to spend a little bit of time so that I can give you the best kind of feedback I can. Right, okay. Oh, Roy's just arrived and says late too. We'll watch later. Okay. Well, they're all recorded, so you can go back. I think it takes roughly about 24 hours or about 18 hours or something like that for YouTube to properly render this, so that if you're watching it back, you can also watch the comments at the same time. If you come in before that, you can watch it, but you don't get the live comments cropping up as well. And Russ says, thanks everyone. Another great week, Kim, full of useful tips. Take care. See you all next week. Okay, excellent. Thank you once again, everybody, for turning up. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. And make sure you get your photos in. Either put them into the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, or email them to me, kim@kimayres.co.uk, and tell me what your sticking points are. And if you don't have a photo, but you've got a question, then do make sure you ask. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.